We'll get right into our questions this evening. First, there's a comment from Brother Bill Schwegler, who I believe is in the Shreveport, Louisiana area. And it concerns, it's a statement in support of comments made yesterday. He states, when Brother A is a false teacher, he is walking in darkness. When Brother B works or acts in fellowship with Brother A, he is also walking in darkness. If I then fellowship or work with Brother B, who is walking in darkness, I join him in his darkness and forfeit my fellowship with God. This then, and he's quoting from 1 John 1, 5 through 6, is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. And my response, Brother Bill, is amen. I believe that is the whole issue here. And on 2 John 9 through 11 is just looking at it from the standpoint of the other side of the coin of the thing. But here in 1 John chapter 1, he is stressing that fellowship is contingent on walking in the light. How is one walking in the light when he is fellowshipping a false teacher? And so if he's fellowshipping a false teacher and thus has ceased to walk in the light, then fellowshipping him implies what? We have ceased to walk in the light. Now, brethren, the brethren that are involved in the Dave Miller thing understood this 20 years ago concerning Ruba Shelley. They understood it 10 years ago concerning Max Lucado. They know what these passages teach. In fact, I was going through my files the other day, and I've come across a number of articles, materials dealing with liberalism. In fact, I have a fairly large collection of files dealing with liberalism and fellowship issues and doctrine and things of this nature, articles on unity, written by many of these men. And guess what? They were teaching then what we're teaching now. Now who's changed? And that's really the issue here. And they need to get up the gumption and put their names on some propositions, and let's have at it. And settle this matter the way the Bible intends it to be settled, rather than doing what they're doing. But let's proceed to some of the other questions. And some are based on yesterday's discussion and ramifications of those things. What is the problem with the Churches of Christ disaster relief program? Would it be scriptural if it was not for the fellowship problem? Well, part of the problem in the disaster relief program has to do with its structure. It's set up in such a way that it identifies itself, its very name identifies itself as though it itself is the function of the church. It has usurped and has taken over and is supplanting, or at least presenting itself as though this is the official organ and outlet of the Church of Christ, which it is not. It has no right to identify itself in that fashion, that is, those that are involved in it. What if we started just an orphan's home and started calling it the Church of Christ Orphan Home, and started appealing to people on the basis of funds and so on along that line? I think there'd be a lot of the other orphan homes would suddenly be up in arms that what you're trying to do, Brother Denham, would be presenting yourself as though you have a status or standing in the church that we do not have. There is some false advertisement involved in that to start with. But then the other aspects of the basic structure, the very nature of the structure. If you go back and look at their purpose statement and notice their bylaws, the fellowship problems are indigenous to the structure of the thing. They state from the very outset that they're not going to take sides in brotherhood issues. Well, what does that mean? We'll fellowship anybody. That's the bottom line of it. That's part of the structure. So if you're going to change the fellowship, get rid of the fellowship issues, you've got to change the whole structure to start with. And that's just that aspect. From our own experience, a few years ago, we had a hurricane came through the Tidewater area and did a tremendous amount of damage. And the Churches of Christ, disaster relief effort, came in and worked through two of the most liberal churches in the state of Virginia. Now, brethren, that's what took place. And one of those congregations is the Providence Road Church. That's how they advertise themselves. In small letters, it's the A Church of Christ. That congregation now has a band in its worship program. Now, they're connected with the Churches of Christ disaster relief program. They're tied in with them intricately. Another group, the Denby congregation up on the peninsula, which is very liberal, is tied in with a denominational outfit called Duco. And in their effort, they're kind of combining the two all in one little program right there on the peninsula. Now, why that does not bring the Churches of Christ disaster relief program and those brethren associated with it into some measure in fellowship with the denominations, I am at a loss to explain why that would not be the case. They know that surely they would have to know that Denby is connected and involved intricately with Duco. It's on their website. They parade it, they promote it, they push it, and they clearly, from their own statements, believe that the churches, the various denominational churches, Methodist, Presbyterian, and such like, I believe also there are disciples of Christ involved in it. They believe that they are in fellowship with God just as they claim they are. Now, that's just some of the problems. You know, I'll open this to the floor in just a moment because several of these go together. And you're going to see as we proceed why we're approaching it this way. As a follow-up to this, a series of questions. Is benevolence a part of the work of the church? Yes. Galatians 6:10. I believe we would all admit that. Is providing for the needs of children who have no home part of the benevolent work of the church? Yes. James 1:27. May the church fulfill this responsibility regarding B through a children's home such as Tennessee Children's Home? Most definitely. Most definitely. A legally constituted home is just that. It is a home. And by the way, it's not the church. And it's not an institution designed to take the place of the church. It is simply helping the church carry out its responsibility under James 1:27. Now, here comes the catches. Does the church have the responsibility of helping those in need, such as victims of hurricanes, tornadoes, etc.? Galatians 6:10, as we therefore have opportunity, we're to do good unto all men, especially those who are of the household of faith. May the church fulfill this responsibility regarding D through an agency such as Churches of Christ Disaster Relief? No. No. The party that submits this is trying to say that the Disaster Relief Association or effort is equal to the orphans' home. Let them prove it. Let them prove it. There is an assertion that is involved in this question that involves what we call in logic begging the question. And they need to come forward and make the argument. Whoever offers that type of approach needs to lay out their case. As I said, the very foundation or format that is laid out for how the disaster relief program is set up shows that there are many more problems with it than simply its structure. The very philosophy that underlies it, as opposed to that of an orphan's home, is different. F. Do you believe that those who are involved in the Churches of Christ, disaster relief, and those who support them will be lost eternally for so doing? Well, let me ask a counter question. I think it'll get to get to the point. Do you believe that those who are involved in the use of instrumental music in worship or support of a missionary society and those who support them will be lost eternally for so doing? The whole issue is a matter of authority, brethren. It's not a matter of how I feel or you feel or they feel or anyone else feels as to who's going to go to hell or what for what. It comes down to, do we have authority for it? And if there is no authority for it, then we cannot, we dare not, we must not do it. It's that simple. And one of the emails I sent out a couple of weeks ago to one of these fellows, we were discussing the matter back and forth. I made the point, I had challenged him to offer evidence. We were discussing the Dave Miller situation, and particularly eldership R&R, and this applies to the Churches of Christ disaster relief as much as it does to that subject. I asked him to set forth the cogent argument that demanded the conclusion that eldership R&R, as taught and practiced, as taught by Dave Miller and practiced by the Brown Trail Church, was scriptural. And then I made the point, when he refused to do so, I said, you ought to hang your head in shame every time you would have the audacity to stand up before a crowd and demand of a Baptist preacher or of Baptist people in attendance that they present evidence from the Scriptures that instrumental music is scriptural in worship. Now you think about the hypocrisy, brethren, that's involved in that. We have brethren that will stand up and they will burn the walls down concerning mechanical instrumental music. They will really rip into Christian church preachers. And I've been saying all along, if I were a Christian church preacher, I'd be hitting these men with debate challenges on the instrument and then going into the debate and hammer away at the Churches of Christ disaster relief. And point out how they're not trying to establish authority for that. Why are they worrying about instrumental music? Why are they concerned about that? Well, I haven't gotten a response from you. Silent as a tomb. But there is hypocrisy, brethren, involved in this. They need to show authority for these things to start with. And by the way, when's the last time that any of the major open forums that are associated with brethren who are connected with GBN, the Churches of Christ Disaster Relief, MSOP, OABS, anything like that, polishing the pulpit, address these specific subjects in their open forums? When is the last time at the MSOP lectures that they really sought to set out the case for instance, eldership R&R? If it's just a matter of opinion, it's not worth dividing the brotherhood over. Because it is a matter of opinion. That's what they're saying. That's what they're practicing. When's the last time they've done that? You're not going to see them do it, brethren. They're not going to do it, but they're going to stand up and tell the Christian church, you have no right to use the instrument. And they're going to tell the Christian church that you have no right to have missionary society. Meanwhile, they'll continue sending their money over to the Churches of Christ Disaster Relief as though it is nothing. Hypocrisy. Pure and simple hypocrisy. Also, this question. How can you condemn Lads to Leaders being an organization that is not under the oversight of elders, and yet some of the speakers have also been in organizations which are not under an eldership, such as the Gospel Journal? Well, the criticisms I've seen from brethren opposing Lads to Leaders, the criticisms are not aimed at it simply being not under the oversight of elders. I think that's a very simplistic and truncated attack that simply is not true. That's not been the line of argument but rather it is not just its basic organizational structure that's under consideration, it's its very function, that it is functioning as a church. And that is what is at issue. They conduct religious services like a church. They take up a contribution like a church. And what do they and how do they dispense with the funds? These are things that we're dealing with on the organizational aspect of things. But beyond that is, again, the fellowship issue, which is a problem, again, just as indigenous to Lads to Leaders as it is the Churches of Christ disaster relief. Do you know that in the Nashville area, and you can go to their website and see it, that Walt Lever and the congregation that he is working with in Nashville has been a part of Lads to Leaders since 1986? Well, brethren, do you know who Walt Lever is? Anybody remember a program called the Jubilee? The Nashville Jubilee? Walt Lever was one of the movers and shakers of that thing, one of the prime cheerleaders for it, promoters, speakers, and everything else. They're closely involved in it. And I'm sure that you could examine websites across the Brotherhood and verify many other such connections to Lads to Leaders. One particular situation that came up just a couple of years ago in one of the conventions is that a man who was marked, withdrawn from scripturally by the congregation here, was one of the key speakers in the Lads to Leaders program. And that's Brother Mike Kaiser. He is very prominent with Lads to Leaders. And what's fascinating is the brethren, or some of those brethren that are now fellowshipping him and participating with him in that, a few years ago would not do so because he was scripturally withdrawn. In fact, some of them have stood in this very pulpit and have stood in this very building and condemned the actions of Brother Kaiser and called for his repentance. Hypocrisy? I believe so. And these brethren, they'll say, well, we don't answer to you. I know that. You don't answer to this forum. But it doesn't make hypocrisy not hypocrisy. It's not going to change it. And by ignoring it, you're still going to have to give an account. And that's the situation we're dealing with. And then finally this one, and then we'll open it up to the floor. And so we've got a bunch of stuff here. He said, well, the question is, why is it wrong to fellowship MSOP, GBN, OABS, polishing the pulpit? And keep in mind, polishing the pulpit has been using Dave Miller and Phil Sanders and others. And it's been documented about Phil Sanders' attitude toward the Christian church and so on, when they themselves have not taught error. Who says they've not taught error? Let me ask this question. Can not one teach or promote error by means other than verbal or overt teaching? What about 1 Timothy chapter 4:16? Take heed unto thyself. What's he talking about there? Take heed unto thyself. He's talking about the behavior, isn't he? The action. And unto the doctrine, that is the teaching. Continue in them, for in doing so thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee. The implication is, if you don't continue in them, you're not going to save yourself, and you're not going to save those that hear you. You're going to undermine the truth. Brethren, we can undermine the truth by hypocrisy, by practicing false doctrine, simply in our practice, by our example. And 2 John 9 through 11 is still there. An individual who is fellowshipping those who are not abiding in the doctrine of Christ have not God. They have not God. And they are partakers of other men's sins, verse 11. Now, are they guilty of sin? If they're guilty of sin, are they promoting error? Are they promoting false doctrines? When an individual fellowships the individual who is teaching eldership R&R, for instance, is he not aiding and abetting? The laws of our land recognize this principle, folks. Let's suppose someone broke out from the hooscow down here in Pensacola jail, went on the lam, ran up to, just say, Bruton, Alabama, and had a family cousin up there that decided to hide them out, knowing that they'd broken out from the Pensacola jail. Now, what do you think the police are going to do to the individual who hides the one who broke out of the Pensacola jail? And maybe an uncle, well-meaning uncle, oh, I'm going to help that boy get his life straightened out, but for right now I've just got to give him some transportation up to Tennessee and hide him out in the hills for a little bit and talk with him. And so he puts him in his automobile and drives him all the way up to Tennessee and hides out with him. What do you think the law's going to do when the police catch up to the fellow that broke out of the Pensacola jail? They're going to say that the man that hid him in Bruton and the man that provided transportation and then hid him up in Tennessee, despite the fact he's a little further down the line in this process, they didn't actually participate in helping him break out of jail, by the way. They are said to be accomplices after the fact. And guess what? They're going to be breaking rocks right along with him. All right, let's open it to the floor. It's a race to the front. We got Brother Skip, and then we'll go to the first dub, and dub number one, or dub, is that number two? And then we've got Brother Michael Heck. Okay.
Whoever that is. Skip Francis, Suffolk, Virginia. Daniel knew that I would probably be up here when we were going to talk about these issues, primarily because I've done a fair amount of research on the parachurch organizations, and that's what these are called. They're an effort to take the work of the church and give them someone else. This is not something new. The very first apostasy that occurred in the church was a matter of taking the organization of the church and turning it over to a clergy system, which was basically giving the edification of the church over to something other than the local church. In, I believe it was 1848, the American Missionary Society began and was headed by Alexander Campbell and was rightly opposed by David Lipscomb and Jacob Creeth and some others on the idea that they were just simply turning over the evangelistic work to someone else, not to the church. Now we're talking about turning the benevolent work over to an agency called Churches of Christ Disaster Relief Incorporated. I guess we should make sure we put that part in there so we understand the church is not a corporation. Now, some congregations are incorporated for various legal purposes, but the church is not a corporation. They have a board of directors, they have 11 paid employees, they advertise on the internet, they solicit on the internet for funds, which, by the way, is not the way the church is to receive funds just to begin with. Mm-hmm. They have a typical internet where they have the PayPals and all of the credit card logos and such. And among other things, they even offer a free, for a donation, CD of the Jordanaires. And that's if you even set aside all the fellowship problems. Mm-hmm. Brethren, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 4, the Apostle Paul writes, imploring us with much urgency that we should receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. Paul is referring to the collection that was taken up for benevolent work. Giving is fellowship. To add to this problem, there is another statement on the Churches of Christ Disaster Relief website. It says that they receive donations from Churches of Christ and churches. Now, if any reasonable person were to read that statement, we would know that they're not talking about Churches of Christ in the second half. They're talking about denominations. Mm-hmm. They are in fellowship with denominations in this practice. Mm-hmm. The parachurch groups as a whole basically provide whatever they provide to whoever's willing to pay the price. And that's probably the key problem. That's especially true with last leaders. One of the problems, we talk about fellowship, one of the problems that Daniel and I both have is both of our congregations in the Tidewater area have withdrawn from several congregations there. One of those congregations, the Bayside congregation, is right now, and this is recent, this isn't something that was old and previous to this. This is something they just started in the last year. So we're talking about something that's going on right now. They are publicly advertising their involvement in Last Leaders and their intent to go to one of the conventions in the not distant future. Now, here's the problem. We who are not in fellowship with the Bayside congregation in the Tidewater area of Virginia, if we were involved in Last Leaders and went to their convention, what would we be doing?
Fellowship.
We'd be in fellowship with them there when we can't be in fellowship with them here. Now, if ever there was a spiritual inconsistency, that would be one of them.
It'd be hypocrisy.
That's right.
And it's not just hypocrisy, it undermines the Bible doctrine of fellowship, which just, in effect, means let's throw the book away and make it up as we go along. Brother Doug.
Doug McClish, Denton, Texas. The last scenario there, Skip, reminded me of, what was it, 2006, Brother Glenn McCauley was to speak on the Lake Tahoe family encampment with a preacher, fellow preacher from Huntsville, Alabama, whom he could not fellowship in Huntsville, Alabama.
Gary Brady
could go to Lake Tahoe and speak on the same program with him. As it turned out, the other brother in Huntsville wasn't able to go, so that didn't occur, but that's not what prevented it from occurring. At the risk of being among those who are trying to destroy 9 good works in the church, I want to point out that you missed the special issue of the New Gospel Journal that had all the articles defending Brother Dave Miller and OABS, and I'm being very facetious.
Yes.
You said nobody had come forward with anything on this from the other side. What you said a moment ago on 1 Timothy 4 and verse 16 made me think of what Paul had already said in verse 12. Be thou an example of the believers in word, in manner of life, or in faith, and love, purity. Manner of life. Take heed to thyself. Actually, what we do gets clearer to what our convictions really are, an expression of them, than what we say.
Absolutely.
That's the proof of what our convictions are. It's what we do. I doubt that the instructors at Memphis School of Preaching are teaching anything different from what they've ever taught in the classroom on John, 2 John 9 to 11, Ephesians 5:11, the other passages. But they're offsetting the influence of that oral teaching by what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And that is speaking louder than what they are saying. It's not what they are saying, it's what they're doing. Let's say just a word about the disaster relief thing, and its failure to be a parallel to the orphan home. When a congregation contributes to a children's home, it's contributing to a divine institution.
Absolutely. Again.
To be parallel, we would have to establish a separate corporation to which we would send funds, which would then send funds to the orphan home. For the disaster relief thing to be parallel to what we have the children's home. It's not parallel at all. It's a new organization that's usurping a work that the Lord gave local congregations to do, just as the Missionary Society did in evangelism.
Excellent points. Brother Michael.
He stole one of my points. I'm Michael Hatcher from Bellview. I was going to mention that there are three divine institutions that God set forth: government, the home, and the church. And when you have a children's home, that is one of those three divine institutions. Where's Disaster Relief Fund organization in those three institutions? It's not. That was a work of the church. Not when you give to a home, you're giving to a home. That's a divine institution. Something else that Doug brought out, though, that I thought you might want to add to this, in relationship to just the saying and not the action, is a debate challenge that I received, and because I didn't want a written debate, I would have accepted an oral debate. Brother Denham accepted to do a written debate with Brother Joshua Day, who is an instructor in the Tri-City School of Preaching and one of the preachers of the Stony Creek congregation with Wesley Simons. In that setting forth a proposition, Brother Day refused to accept anything in the proposition dealing with the action of Dave Miller's sermon, as if you could separate the action from the sermon. And he gave the excuse, and you can correct me if I don't put it exactly right, that he did not know the heart of all of the ones involved in it, and because he did not know the heart of the individuals that are involved in it, or their motive, one of them might have had an improper motive, and that would make the whole thing unscriptural. Now, is that an accurate?
That is absolutely correct. That's right on target.
Which, that whole idea is foolishness, but you see the attempt in defending Dave Miller along that line. Yes, here's the sermon, and here's Joshua Day saying, I'll defend the sermon, but I won't defend the action. The two go together. You cannot separate them. I use the illustration Jesus set forth in Matthew 28:19 and 20, Mark 16:16, Luke 24:46 and 47. He set forth salvation, what it would take to have the remission of sins and salvation. We turn over to Acts 2nd chapter. Jesus had said, as recorded in Luke 24, wait in Jerusalem. Well, we go to Jerusalem and see what they did and what they taught. And when we see that, we understand what he said. The action corresponded with the speaking. And that's the same thing in regards to this.
Before Skip gets up and commenting on the statements that have already been made, suppose we had a man, you'll say it was Michael Hatcher, and he got up and preached a barn burner of a sermon against stealing. And then the next day you pick up the newspaper and you find that he's been arrested for robbing one of the banks around town. Now, did he teach stealing? Did he teach that we're supposed to steal? Most certainly did. By his actions he did. And he contradicted what he taught verbally. Brethren, we teach our little kids better than that. We teach our little kids better than that. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. Brother Skip.
I just wanted to elaborate on a couple of quick points. First of all, when Hurricane Katrina happened, a number of congregations went out on, I know that this, I think, originated on, as far as I know, on the internet list. Now, there was probably some other venues that came out of, but a number of folks asked what they could do to help. And were notified of two, I believe it was, congregations that were focal points for some effort. And I know that literally thousands of dollars went into that effort from various congregations around the area. I know that because we also participated in that effort. Also, I believe there was another similar situation when a family lost their home in Mountain City, and a number of congregations pitched in and sent funds to that. Now, the problem we have, again, and that's been mentioned, but I wanted to emphasize it again from this practical view. If we'd have all sent our funds to Churches of Christ Disaster Relief, that's when we would have a problem. Because then we're not in control as the local congregation of what's going on. Our obligation is to do our benevolent work, not to let someone else do our benevolent work by just sending them money, and to know where those funds are going and if they're being properly applied. One other issue I wanted to mention again is all this comes down to the problem of fellowship. Brethren, I'm going to restate something I said 2 years ago when we had a lectureship in Spring, Texas on the issue of fellowship. I believe fellowship with error is going to be the instrumental music issue of our day. It's going to divide the church, and it is dividing the church, and this is where this is all coming out of.
Brother Danny, just a moment. I'm following up on a point that Skip had made earlier concerning the Bayside congregation. 5 churches that we had withdrawn from, which also included the Denby and the Providence Road churches. This coincided with a gospel meeting that we had, Brother Garland Elkins. And the men, at that time we had no elders, and the men of the congregation wanted to get Brother Elkins' advice. And so he looked over the paperwork that we had dealt with, the mountain of evidence that we had concerning each of these congregations, the letters that we had sent out, and the letters we were ready to send out. And he got up and commended the congregation at Newport News, and by extension, the Suffolk congregation, which also took the same action, and the Portsmouth congregation, where Brother Jimmy Gribble preaches. He commended us and commended the men for the foresight and the determination and the courage to stand for what's right in withdrawing from these churches. Now, brethren, the irony of it is, Bayside is in Lads to Leaders. It's involved in it. And now here's a congregation been duly withdrawn from, scripturally withdrawn from, and a withdrawal that was endorsed and observed by Brother Garland Elkins, and he stated was scriptural and so on. Now, Lads to Leaders says, no, that's not right. They can fellowship anybody. Now let me ask you, what is the standard? Is it whatever's right and good for Lads to Leaders? Or is it what the New Testament teaches on the matter of fellowship? What's the authority, brother? Brother Danny.
Danny Douglas, Dresden, Tennessee. There's 2 or 3 things here regarding the 3 divine institutions ordained by God. I'd like to recommend anyone to study the Wood-Chicago debate in 1958, and we reviewed that in the 2006 spring lectureship, and it would be in that book, a review of that debate. And that debate in written form, clearly set forth by Brother Guy and Woods, shows the arguments for the home, whether it be a natural home or a reinstated home, and the divine and the government and the church. Another thing that a lot of people seem to be overlooking is that 2 John 9-11 in and of itself is a part of the doctrine of Christ. And to violate verses 9 through 11 or 10 and 11 is in fact to cease to abide in the doctrine of Christ, to disregard that teaching. And thirdly, on this matter of teaching by example, in Acts 1 verse 1, Luke records, the former treatise have I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began both to do and to teach. Now these brethren that are saying one thing and doing another obviously are not following the example of Jesus Christ.
Brother Lloyd Hart.
Lloyd Hart to speak from Itasca, Texas. I'm not opposed to children's homes, but I want us to think about something here. Our middle son and his wife applied to work at the New Mexico Children's Home there at Portales. And in the interview, they asked them if they had any opposition to going to high school dances and accompanying the students or the kids from the home and acting as chaperones there. Also, they asked if they had a problem with women's role in the leadership of the church, because the congregation there that the children attend, I understand Doug Hale, I don't know if he's still there or not, but I have some material that he has written, whereas he refers to all the denominations and the problems that we have with them, and simply saying they're our brethren in error. And what I'm getting at is that our children's homes receive funds and support from anywhere and everywhere, and they're in fellowship many times with liberal brethren. And to me, I see that we have a problem here, that if we join in them supporting, like in Louisiana, for instance, they support the children's home there at Albany, and that home is maintained by the non-Sunday school brethren. And to me, we were supporting that doctrine when we would send money from Zachary to support those children over there when they were being taught and raised in that environment of the non-Sunday school church.
Good comments. What we have been dealing with concerning the children's home has to do with the concept itself is scriptural. Obviously, we're reaching a point where is there one that is being scripturally operated? And that's the question. Brother Dutton.
Doug Mowry from Big Sandy, Texas area. Subject I don't think we've discussed thus far in these last few days is politics and the preacher, politics and the church. I'm sure that all of us here are very concerned about the people that are up for president this go around. Now then, I understand as a preacher and as a church officially, we don't enter into politics. So we would have to be careful about that, being tax exempt and things like that. But I'd like your consideration on what am I as an individual, can I speak out in some situation about
I'd say so.
politics?
I'd say so. You have rights as a U.S. citizen. You have certain obligations as a Christian under U.S. law. To be able to speak out, the church has to be very careful as to endorsing a specific candidate or something of that nature. But it can definitely stand up and speak out on moral issues and things of that nature. And if the government says we can't, then it's overstepped its authority in those matters, because those matters are addressed in Scripture, and then we get into a religious rights issue. Brother Gene, and last one, then I have one more little brief statement.
Gene Hill with the Indianola Church of Christ. I've been concerned about politics for a long time in my adult years. A lady some years back that I was associated with made the comment that your politics are an expression of your religious worldview. Now think about that. When a politician gets up and says, well, I personally am opposed to abortion, but as filling this office, I'll have to go with the will of the people. Well, he doesn't have courage of his conviction. If I believe that taking innocent life is wrong, then it's wrong, and that's correct. That's the right worldview. As a citizen of the United States of America, I have obligations of citizenship. One of the privileges we have is to influence through our political process the political process. Jesus in Matthew 5, we are salt and light, and if the salt has lost its savor and all that, we're all familiar with that. Brethren, do we write letters? Do we write letters? When I was in Pensacola, Kentucky years ago, the church had a 15-minute live radio program Monday through Friday. and was talking with one of the salesmen at the radio station, and he said, for every card or letter you get from the public, that represents 250 listeners. So when we write a letter, these people we're writing a letter to, whether it's Ford Motor Company or by the way, I don't buy Levi Strauss stuff anymore because some years back they stopped supporting the Boy Scouts because the Boy Scouts stood up and said we're not going to have pedophiles as scoutmasters. So I don't buy Levi material anymore. I just don't do that. And still haven't, because I don't know if they've changed the position. But the thing is if you write a letter to these people, you'll make a difference. Heard of a young lady, a 12-year-old girl, was out buying clothes with her mother, and she says, "Mom, I can't wear these clothes because when she goes like this, you see her belly button." You know, that little girl recognized. So she on her own went home and wrote a letter to that company. And that company, because of that one little girl's letter, said, well, we're going to start producing different kinds of clothes. We can make a difference. When we go to vote, and that's a serious issue, and I realize the problems we have. When we go into the voting booth and cast a vote, we need to go and then write somebody and say, listen, I voted for you, and I believe your position on thus and so is wrong, and here's why. I'm watching you. I'm going to talk to 10 of my friends, and I'm going to get them to talk to 10 of their friends, and so on and so on. And we start writing letters and start letting people know we're here. I want to start preaching here, brother. Paul went into the marketplace. Paul told those people what was right. When was the last time you went into the marketplace and told people what was right? We need to do that. Now, we don't do it as a church. I don't write anything on the church letterhead of a political nature to organization stuff. Emails, telephone calls, personal letters. Brethren, we're not doing that. And when we start doing it, then we have something to complain about.
Thank you, Brother Gene. What I wanted to just bring up, just briefly, think about 25 years ago, and a phenomena that spread across the country that was fueled by the Willow Creek Community Church movement, and then the Saddleback operation of Rick Warren and all of that type stuff. And even going back before that, the Crossroads and Boss Roads movement, the Boston Church movement, and what came out of that called the Multiplying Ministries operation. Brethren, some of these things, these parachurch groups that have been developed, are nothing more than larger versions of the old multiplied ministries or multiplying ministries operations that were being carried on by these liberal churches back in the 80s. And it's now just a matter of, they were opposed then by some of the very people that are supporting these big operations now. And it's just a matter of who had them as opposed to who has them now, as to whether or not they were considered authoritative or scriptural. If it was wrong for Richland Hills to do what it did back in the 80s with its multiplying ministries operation, then anything that mimics that, I don't care how big it is and who supports it, is just as wrong. And brethren, we need to take a stand against this, and these brethren better pony up and show some backbone and start putting their names to some propositions and demonstrate the scriptural authority of it. Number one, because it's right. It's the right thing to do. 1 Thessalonians 5:21-22. And they're going to have to answer for that ultimately, number two. Yeah. Matthew 23, 1-3. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. And that illustrates the point beautifully, that their actions actually implied error. on their part. They were in sin because of it.